Hey, this is Marvin. It's July 19th. It's Monday, and the spirit of summer word for today is snakes. Now, snakes, they live all four seasons, but they're more active in the summertime, at least here in this part of the world, and so that's why I want to talk about them today. And I'll begin by telling a story about my family and snakes. My dad grew up during the Depression. They were poor, everybody was poor. They didn't have a swim club membership. They would go down to the creek to swim that ran near their house. And sometimes they would go down there and see a water moccasin, he and his sisters. So if they saw a water moccasin, my dad would walk home, get the shotgun, walk back down to the creek, shoot dead the water moccasin, and then they'd all jump back into the water again. Now, did I get to walk around in the woods with a shotgun shooting snakes when I was a kid? No. This is so unfair. My dad was so scared of snakes, he hated snakes so much, he wouldn't let me and my brother and sister go out in the woods in the summertime. I guess there was ticks too and chiggers and all that stuff. But anyway, we could only go out in the woods in the wintertime. He was so afraid of snakes. Anyway, that's a story about my family and snakes. But I'll tell you another story about snakes. It's in the Bible. Maybe you've heard the story before. It's at the very beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis. It's a story about the first human beings, Adam and Eve. And God puts them in a garden and says, you can eat any fruit that's growing in this garden except the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat from that tree, you'll die. And so the snake comes along, and the snake says to the woman, hey, why don't you eat from the fruit off of that tree? And the woman says, we can't because God won't let us. If we do, we'll die. And the snake says, you won't die. You'll just become like God. You'll know the difference between good and evil. And so the woman looks at the tree, and the fruit looks like it probably tastes good. And, it's desirable because, it's going to make you wise. So she eats it, and then she gives it to her husband. And then God confronts them for their sin, and there are consequences, and it's kind of all downhill from there. Now, one of the morals of the story, according to an Old Testament professor I saw, was don't ever get into a conversation with a talking snake. Nothing good will come of it. So I've tried to take that to heart. But the other lesson I think from the story is that it's kind of a trick situation here. If they had not eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they would have learned the difference between good and evil, because the difference between good and evil is the difference between obeying God and disobeying God. So the way that we become wise is not by grasping some knowledge out there, it's by disciplining ourselves to obey God's commandments. And I think that's the difference between wisdom and knowledge, or maybe wisdom and mere information. There's a lot of information we can grab out there, and God knows there's all kinds of information on the internet. But wisdom, that comes from obeying God, from keeping God's commandments. So I want to encourage you today to keep God's commandments. And maybe you're wondering, well, what are those commandments? There's a couple of places you can begin. There's lots of commandments in the Bible. God gives God's people a ton of commandments, a ton of rules and regulations to obey. But really, make sure that you don't avoid seeing the forest for the trees. It all boils down to this: love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Treat your neighbor, treat other human beings the way that you want to be treated. And that is the way to become wise. And that is the difference between knowing a lot of stuff and putting the stuff that you know to proper use, to godly use, to use that makes the world a better place. So that's my spirit of summer reflection for this Sunday. Remember, don't get in the conversation with a talking snake, and for this Monday. And keep the commandments. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. And that's the way you can become wise. Take care and goodbye.